Hi, my name is Sally Rossi-Ormon, and I represent my business, Sally Row Outdoors. I'm an outdoor educator, and my big passion is getting people outside to connect with nature in ways they may have and may not have in their past. I'm an alum of the Holly Hill Farm, educational farm in Cohasset. Had been working there for about 12 years, leading everybody from preschoolers to seniors out and around, teaching them about regenerative gardening and plant soil basis, as well as just educating them about nature, the fields, the ponds, and the salt marsh that surrounds it. I got into this as a way to kind of learn about food. I'm a big cook. I love and enjoy food, and growing my own food for over 45 years now. I'm also the director of the new community garden in Scituate called Appleton Field Community Garden over in the West End. It's a gorgeous piece of land that we have now started since last year, and we are actively seeking participants in this half-acre of gorgeous field of dreams, as we call it. I'm also a manager of the other community garden called Teak Sherman Community Garden. It's a food pantry garden in Scituate, located down near First Parish Road and 3A, and that's been going for almost 16 years now, where a portion of our food goes to the food pantry. And so I'm very much into helping people get food into their lives, healthy food, and also build up a resiliency so that we are responsible for what, not only nutritionally what we're putting in our body, but also what we're putting into our community. And also giving people skill sets to take care of themselves and their families, particularly in today's environment where food is getting more expensive and things are getting hard to come by, that maybe people relying on themselves and not so much other people is part of my mission. So that brings me to mushrooms. Why mushrooms? Why fungus? You know, I didn't know much about fungus until probably about 8-9 years ago, to tell you the truth, when I was leading kids on the farm talking about the plants that they can eat, edible foraging, and realizing that there's a lot in nature that is available, and teaching children plant-based medicine and adults as well with some of the food that we were foraging. I came about fungus information when Whole Foods had donated to the Holly Hill Farm these grow boxes. Has anybody ever had or seen these mushroom grow boxes? So you can buy them, roots to, I think there's some in some like Home Depot and that sort of thing. They had donated like 200 of these boxes to the farm. And you know, we didn't know what to do with it. So we started to open them up and take them in wheelbarrows and throw them out into the woods to see whether they would grow. And then they did. And then I started to say, okay, now I know what an edible mushroom looks like because I put it there. So that really got me into thinking about identifying the things that are edible in the fungus world, not just in the plant kingdom. So that's really what got me started to intriguing me to find out. As we walk in the woods, we're always seeing fungus. We're seeing these wonderful things growing off of trees or on the logs, and trying to find the different ones and the interesting ones. And then getting deeper into the whole fungal world, where they are medicine suppliers, they are bioremediators, and they are actually what holds our whole system together. Most of the fungal that we see is really under the ground, so we don't really see a lot of it unless it's growing on a tree or coming out and such. So I started to think, okay, if I can grow it myself, then I'm for sure knowing what I'm growing, and also what I'm eating, and then finding out the benefits of eating mushroom, which is a whole other nutritional profile that's amazing for you. There's a lot of medicinal properties in mushrooms. They're great immune enhancers. They are antibacterial, and also they're high in nutrition. They're steeped in a lot of protein, very little fats, and so there a lot of times vegans and vegetarians substitute meats with mushrooms for their protein sources and such. So today's, what I'm going to talk about is about how people are starting to kind of learn about the connection with growing mushrooms in their yards with their plants and with their food to enhance actually their soil and the nutrition in their plants and such. So we'll begin with my first slide. I'm not a techno person, so please. Okay, so this is the topic of conversation here. Myco-gardening and companion planting with your plants at home. They don't have to be vegetables. They can also be other bushes and plants and stuff in your yard. It's nice that you get the benefit of being able to eat these, but you don't have to eat them if you don't want to. So the whole point of actually growing fungus is to create a relationship with your plants under the soil, which creates a more nutrient bioavailability and resiliency in the soil and the plant, and ultimately in the human who might eat it. And I also threw in compost there because a lot of the leftovers, if you will, go into the compost, and mushrooms and fungus are great decomposers. So they're great in your compost and stuff, adding that fungal element to it. So first of all, has anybody grown mushrooms, fungus? Did you have the little kit? And you've got the little kit. Has anybody spored a log with shiitake? Shiitake, yeah.
Not shiitake, but we've actually taken logs that we knew that were producing,
right,
and transplanted them. So we, took a log and brought it home, put it in a corner of a vegetable garden, and it was amazing how many times that reproduced more mushrooms and more mushrooms.
Right. So
until it totally decomposed.
Right, until they decompose the substrate, as we call it, and such. That's great. I actually had 2 classes last year at Teak Sherman Community Garden. Demonstrating inoculation of shiitake logs, where the mycelium or the fungus is attached to a piece of wood, and you put it inside the log. They need to be kind of fresh logs. They can't have other fungus growing in it. And then also we did oyster mushrooms in a different type of log and such, which produced some great mushrooms. The kind of gardening we're having here is we're actually putting it directly into the gardens. And so you're not having to try to find a source of wood and all that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit easier. It regenerates a lot of times year after year, so you're not having to redo it, which is great. So when we talk about mushrooms, this is what most people think of what a mushroom is. Which it is, but it's really, the mushroom is what we're seeing is what we call the fruit of the mushroom. 90%, 95% of the fungus, I'm going to call it fungus because they're not really interchangeable, it's all fungus. Mushroom is really what we think about when we think about mushroom. But the mushroom itself is really the fruiting body, right? Like people liken it to the apple on the tree. So most of it's actually under the ground. And it's actually composed of these little filaments down here that start to congregate and start to get tangled, and then start to, at the point when they're ready, that they've eaten up the substrate or their nutrition in the ground, then they start to put out their mushroom. And the mushroom parts that, I'm not going to go through all the different parts and stuff, but the most important part is obviously it's actually how it's creates reproductive. So the mushroom cap is actually where the reproductive cells, or the spores, not seeds, but spores, are created and also dispersed from. And they have all different kinds of mechanism for dispersing. It could just be wind blown, it could be a water dropping on it and making them go out like little puff balls and that sort of thing. And these are the type of mushrooms that we associate growing out of the ground. So there's a lot of fungus that grow on trees when you're walking in the woods and you see some, I'm going to call them turkey tails, or you call them chicken of the woods, or any of these other fungus that are growing on the woods and stuff. They're growing out of the tree, or the dying tree, or the wood, or the insect, if you're talking about a different kind of fungus. But these are really what we call mycorrhizal mushrooms or fungus. So they are growing on the ground, but they're not just indiscriminately growing in the ground. They have a relationship with something that's growing around it or near it, that's under the ground as well. So they are, if you've ever heard of the World Wide Web, and when in mycelial talk, we're talking about the web of all this mycelia on the bottom or inside the soil. That's what's really doing the communication and the connection between the species of plants and organisms that live in the ground. So the fungi, just to take a little step by, the fungi are in their own kingdom, right? So they're not plants, they're not animals, but fungi are very much more kind of closer to humans and or animals and what they need. They can't go out and hunt, right? So they have to, and they don't manufacture their own food like trees do or plants do with chlorophyll stuff, much like we don't. We also share a lot in common in our body makeup. We're susceptible, fungus is also susceptible to some of the same diseases and fungus that animals are. So they're kind of unique, but they have their own kingdom. There's estimated to be over 50 million different kinds of species, 5 million species in the world, and there's only been 2 or 3% of that have been identified and classified. So we're just really starting to understand what the diversity is in here and around the world as far as fungus itself. Their kingdom also includes the molds and the yeasts and some other kinds of fungal life that we won't really talk about, but that's basically, it's a very large encompassing kind of kingdom. And their fundamental role is in nutrient recycling and exchange in our environment. Getting back to the spores, when they start to come out, when they start to do their life cycle, the spores, I'm going to call them positive and negative. They're not really sexual, like sperm and egg or anything, but they get released by the millions, floating on the air, looking for that little crevice or whatever area that they're going to start their life. When they meet up together, the negative and the positive, I'm going to call them, then they start to create a little, what they call a hyphae. So they're just a little tiny joint, it's microscopic at this point, joining, which then starts to grow. So I kind of think it like pasta, okay, because I'm Italian. So like digitale, they're little tiny pastas, right? So think of it as like that, and then they hook up with another one, and then they start to form these long, what they call hyphal strings. Okay, and so they're all kind of out there spreading out, looking for food to eat or nutrients for themselves, but they're also looking for others of the same species to kind of hook up with. And so these strings kind of go out and they're looking for food, but then they kind of, oh, you're part of me. And then so they start to create these like spaghetti kind of getting curled up, and they're called a bud, where before they start to get to the point where there's not a whole lot of food left in the area, and now they got to go pop up out of the soil and start their life cycle again. So all of this is going on under the ground or in the trees or wherever they're meeting up with, and starting to create that mycelial web connection. And as it expands, it gets larger and starts to make connections. Now, they're also trying to compete with all this other millions of other fungi in there. So they have little defense mechanisms, and they won't grow in certain areas because it's not hospitable to them. That's why when you're doing something like inoculating a log, it's got to be like a clean-cut piece of wood with not a lot of other fungus already in it, because it will have a harder time growing if it has to also kind of compete with other fungal groups. So where does all this nutrient recycling and exchange and relationship goes? We call it the rhizosphere. And the rhizo is basically I know these are not great illustrations, but along the roots of plants, there's these little hairs. And so there's these little relationships with the fungus and the little hairs, or the rhizomal area. And the rhizomal area is everything under the soil, and it includes the critters that are living under the soil as well. So you'll have your centipedes and your nematodes and bacteria, and as well as the plants and the plant roots and all that sort of thing. So it creates kind of a living matrix. So it's not just these little things having their little houses, but they're all very much involved with each other, either feeding off of each other or creating substances for others to be fed off. And so what they do is the soil fungi, they create these relationships, these symbiotic relationships with the plant roots. The plants will start to receive water easier when they've made these connections. Creates a water absorption capabilities. And then also, because of that, the nutrients in the soil are more easily absorbed by the plants. And so they're absorbing the phosphorus and other nutrients that the plant might need to be growing. There's also there's antimicrobial aspects too, so that they're also bringing in kind of medicine into the plant, if you will, to fight off fungus and other bacterial infections. And then the fungi in return receive carbohydrates and sugars that the plant has made and put back down into its roots. And also the fungi receives carbon to build its structure, like the carbon sequestering, and also minerals from the dead and the dying biomasses. The fungi also create relationships, if I can find it in here, with bacteria. So not only are they working with the plant kingdom, but they're also dealing with the microbial kingdom under there. And so the fungi will create like mutualistic relationships with bacteria as well. And this is where nutrient recycling starts to happen. One is feeding the other, one is exuding nutrients, and the other one's taking it in, and they're giving out their beneficial products as well. Bacteria benefit from the fungi, and they help to protect them from pathogens. And fungi benefit from the bacteria by basically they pre-digest some of the food for the fungi and helping to release some of the metabolites that the fungi need to grow. Bacteria can also protect fungi from competing organisms by producing antimicrobial compounds. So where does this happen? And on a deeper scope, this is not the greatest illustration, but think of this as a root hair. And so there's fungi that live on the outside of the root hair, and they're called ectomycorrhizal. So they're starting to have a relationship on the outside. And then there's the others are the mycorrhizal, what they're called arbuscular. And they're the ones that actually live inside the root hairs. And they actually create their whole life cycle within it. They don't come out and create mushrooms like we know them, but they actually live within the structure of the plant's roots. So there's 80 or 90% of all plant forms have this relationship with the arbuscular, the mycorrhizal, these type that go into it. So 80 to 90% of the plants in the world have that relationship. There are some plants that don't, and I'll get into those in a little bit. So the soil fungi can be found living on the roots or in the roots, or ecto or endomycelio. The arbuscular mycorrhizal, the kinds that live within it, are kind of some of the oldest organisms in the world. They are probably of very ancient lineage when plants were starting to be created on the earth and coming out of the ocean. Our plant life came out of the ocean just like everything else, and a lot of the fungi started that relationship at that point too. So a lot of them have grown up that way. They help to create what we call soil sponges. So they actually help to create aggregates in the soil, which are attracting the bacteria to the plant and also the other fungal structures, so that the soil then becomes more absorbent, holds the nutrients in place, and creates an environment that the uptake of the micronutrients is easier. And they also help to retain the nutrients for the plants, and they feed the little microscopic worms, the little nematodes and such that live in the soil, as well as some of our larger insects like the millipedes and such. So they're creating this like little, I'm going to call it like supermarket of nutrition for all the different types of organisms in that rhizosphere. And also it helps to store the carbon in the soil. So they're very important, this arbuscular kind, not that the other isn't, but they're more about plant health and nutrition. There's about 10% of the plants in the world that don't form mycorrhizal relationships. For whatever reason, they decided not to. No, these plants usually exude compounds that repel the fungi growth. And these are examples of these that are in the mustard family, the brassica family, the knotweeds, rhubarb, blueberries, spinach, beet, broccoli, the azalea, rhododendron, and the cranberry. There's a bunch of others as well. So for whatever reason in their development, they decided not to have these kind of relationships. They didn't need it. They put out compounds to kind of dispel the fungi. Maybe early in their generation, they were being attacked by fungi too much, so they developed a resistance to them. There are, of course, what we call bad fungi that live in the soil. These disease creators, the things that cause the potato blight. Back in the Irish times, though, that was a fungus. The stuff that we sometimes see on our tomato plants, so that's a fungus. The type of species is called Fusarium, and they can cause canker sores, root rot, leaf, and vascular wilt. They can also last a long time in the soil. And they can go dormant in the soil and then be resurrected under the same right conditions. And so they can exist, they kind of go into dormancy. In general, you don't want to treat your soil with fungicides, even though you might be having a recurrent problem, because that's going to also kill those good fungi that are in the soil. So what they recommend, I'm going to make sure that I'm not.
Can I just ask, so on the bad guys, there's nothing of those other plants like the mustard greens or rhubarbs that you can plant to slow down the bad guys? It's just, they don't.
Well, you can feed the other stuff in the soil to help it. There's actually, you can buy these little packets of mycorrhizae. Sometimes you'll get these in your packaged compost. They put these in here. Sometimes some of your seeds are treated with these. And again, it's just to give them a little boost to their immune system. I'll go into this in just a little bit about how to use those or such. Let me just see what this next one is. Right, so this is kind of explaining the connections that are going on underneath the soil and how they all feed into each other, communication-wise as well as the exchanging of the nutrients, and it becomes this whole cycle of growth and decay and nourishment and fighting the bacteria, the good and the bad bacteria under the ground. So how do we resist some of this bad fungus, this Fusarium? First thing is to try to grow cultivars that are resistant to it. There's a lot of new plants and vegetables and everything else that they've bred them to be resistant to them. In growing plants and food and such, there's a thing called crop rotation. So in my world, my tomatoes, the ones that are going to be more subjected to this kind of fungus, I don't plant them in the same place every year. Crop rotation means, rotating your crops so that they, one, don't take the same nutrients out of the soil over and over and over again and leave that soil depleted. You put a different kind of crop in the next year to help either put nitrogen or food into the soil, or at least not take the same nutrients that you're going. That's also kind of fools the fungus. or any of the other problems that might be in your soil. So it's not coming up and attacking the same thing. You also want to remove the plant debris that might also have this fungus on it. So I have a huge composting at home, but I never compost my own tomato plants. I bring them to go green. I just don't, my compost is not hot. It's not enough to kill everything. I don't have a big hot pile and such. So anything that's diseased, it could be a house plant as well. Anything that looks like it's succumbed to a fungus or whatever, just get rid of it. People burn it if you want to burn it, you can burn it. Or if you have a real hot composting system that might actually kill it, that's the best way to do. You need to also, in the case of some of the fungus, you need to improve the soil itself for more drainage. Most people associate fungi, mushroom growth after it rains, right? So they're wet, they like the mold, the wet. So make sure that your soil is well drained and it has a lot of good humus in it, enough to hold water, but enough to also let it go if it's with rains. Sometimes people can also kill off the spores in the soil by solar. So you put down your plastic matting. That heat will kill off at least the first inch of anything. A lot of this stuff is way deep in the soil, so you're not going to get some of these older threads and such. But at least for the top inch or two, to lay that plastic down and let the solar rays heat it up and kill it. Do you need to go out and put excessive amounts of these mycorrhizal fungi in your soil? In general, if you have a healthy outdoor garden, whether it's a food garden or your plant garden, you really no need to add additional of these things, because there's zillions of spores out there that's already in your soil, and if it's decent and healthy, you don't need to do that. But this type of amendment is really good if you have soil that you're using over and over again, particularly like in a hoop house, and that soil doesn't, you might get compost and such, but it's in the same space, or in your garden plant, your potted plants and such, which will need a boost in their mycorrhizal. So these little packets, I don't know whether they sell them here. I think I got these at someplace else. They're just like something like a watering can kind of thing that you'll add, and there's a million different kinds of the mycorrhizal in there to help nourish the soil and to keep it fungally alive, as we call it. Sometimes the seeds that you buy might have it also, particularly the ones that are subjected to that. I know like soybeans and that sort of stuff, a lot of times they're subjected to the soil-borne fungi. That will destroy them or mutate them as they grow. So sometimes you'll find seeds that might be inoculated with them as well. That also helps with their nutrient absorption. So right, so we get to the garden. We get to the good part. Okay, so how to plant these things, how to actually introduce some great edible fungus. So the easiest one that I've worked with is what we call a wine cap. And it's related a lot to, in its structure, not so much its taste, but its structure to the common button mushroom that we get in the supermarkets and such. It's got a nice thick stalk to it, and these caps can actually get this big if they get really, really mature. So there's a lot of mushroom for your buck, as they call it. And I started to grow these. At home, really to help me identify them in nature, because they like to grow. This is one they grow in wood chips. Wine cap loves hardwood wood chips. And these actually were originally, these wood chips were in the path to Teak Sherman Garden one year. And all of a sudden these mushrooms came up, and I'm like, oh, those are cool looking. I sent a picture to one of my friends, Doug Litchfield, if anybody knows Doug. He's a well-known farmer in the area. And he goes, oh, I'll go take a look. And so he went to go take a look at them, and then when I went back, they were gone. And I said, what? He goes, oh yeah, those are wine cap. They were delicious, thank you. So I thought, okay, how am I going to figure out what all the characteristics? Because with the mushroom, it's not just the color or shape, it's also what the color of the gills are, what it's growing on, and sort of stuff. So that's when I first started to decide I'm going to grow these so I can identify them. And so these are the ones that I grew out of my garden that I created at home, because I'm crazy. And they're very easy to grow in a regular garden. Like I specifically made a garden for my mushrooms, but I will this year start to grow them alongside my crops as well, because I started it last year at the Teak Sherman Garden. So it's literally, I made a 4x8 garden. And every mushroom has its preferred substrate, or the thing it likes to grow on. So wine caps like wood chips, hard wood chips. And so half of this bed is wood chips that are soaked, getting them all wet, and so pre-decay kind of thing. And then the other half was straw, not hay, but straw. And the other mushroom that I was growing are oyster mushrooms. And oyster mushrooms are really easy to grow. They're fast growers, and because they like straw, they grow real fast. There's not a whole lot to break down before they start to put out their fruiting body. There's a better, this is a harvest from the oyster mushroom bed.
Now, will they grow on mulch as well?
Yes, mulch, but again, they'll take a little longer to grow.
Okay.
And every mushroom has its own, okay, 5 minutes. Every mushroom has its own preference as far as temperature goes, whether it can stand direct sun or not. That's why wine cap is so popular, because it can tolerate kind of like open air. Some things you have to shade a little bit more because they're fungus and they don't want to dry out. Never dry it out. That's the thing. You have a process where you have to keep it watered. And because I was doing this in April, I was also keeping it moist like a greenhouse, so that anything that would evaporate and would stay within it, and then it will start to grow. Sometimes, like the wine cap took 3 months before they started to fruit, whereas the oyster mushroom started to fruit almost in 6 weeks. This year, I'm also going to try something new. There's different levels of difficulty. This one I'm going to be growing this year is called the almond agaricus, which is very similar to the button mushroom, but it has like an almondy smell. These ones are a little bit more less tolerant to cold. So the wine cap, I'll be expecting wine cap to come up again this year without me doing anything to my wine cap. As long as I keep adding wood chips every year, they'll still keep on growing. Whereas these things, they don't like it cold. So even storing this material here, which I bought from North Spore, which is a big distributor here. And you can see all the white here is already, the mycelium is starting to eat up and such. If I wanted to grow them out of this bag, I could, but that would be a waste, because I can have multiple, what they call flushes, out of all of this in a small space. So this I'm going to be growing in warmer temperatures under different conditions, but I'm kind of challenging myself to get this to produce in time. Kind of like my failed artichokes last year. You try something new every year. So wine caps are really easy to grow. They're like for novices. Yes, sir.
So a bag like that.
Yes.
How big of a garden will
Okay, so this will cover, they say 4x4, but like if I'm doing it in a row, it's going to do a good 10-foot row at least. And it's basically done in layers. You usually put some straw or something. It likes contact with the soil, but you don't want all the soil fungus to kind of interfere with it, so you usually put down a layer of either cardboard or the straw. And then you break this all up. This gets all crumbly. It's little pieces of the mycelium. Spread it out, put another layer of the wood chips on top of it. Water, 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 water. So yeah, this bag is like $40, and you'll have multiple flushes. So you'll probably get a couple $100 worth of mushrooms out of it if it's grown correctly.
the wine cap the same?
The wine cap is the wine cap is the same. Actually, it's called the garden fungus for a reason, because it will grow indiscriminately. You'll see it popping up and other
Once you
places.
start it every year,
Yeah, and you add more wood chips.
right, but
Because that mycelium is going to be starting to get thicker and thicker underneath and stuff. My first year when I first grew it, the first place it sprouted was outside of the garden. It's like, what? You know, like, and there is this procedure. I highly recommend, you know, if you do go purchase this, they have these little booklets telling you how to do it. You know, the straw itself, you should really sterilize the straw. Because there's all sorts of spores and fungus and on that before you use it, and I just put it in a big kettle and I boil it and such. But we were very successful last year. This is us doing it at Teak Sherman. I had a class here, and we put in a big garden just of the oyster and the wine cap. And I didn't really get into the nutritional aspect of it, but mushrooms are highly nutritious, protein-wise, low fat. They have all sorts of great compounds in it for brain health, gut health, immune system enhancer. So they're really wonderful for your diet and food. They're easy to cook. Dehydrating them is great for storage purposes. A lot of them can be dehydrated and rehydrated. So once you have these, you can store them and not just have to eat them. You know, sometimes when things grow up in the garden, you kind of like lettuce. You better eat it this week because next week it's going to bolt. So, and that's my little picture. That's my fantasy world. I also teach this, so I'm actually through the Situate Recreation Department. Registration is on Wednesday. We will be putting in a new mushroom garden at our new community garden at Appleton Field. I have a whole big display over there. So if you want to practice it before you go and indulge. And generally, there are times of the year where you do this. If you put it in the fall, you're not going to see the product until the next year. April, May is really when you start these so that you'll see some kind of fruition, if you will, by the summer and then the fall and such. I know this has kind of felt like it all of a sudden was rushed. We were waiting for everybody. But does anybody else have any questions? Or you can come on up and ask me or find out more about information. I'll be at the community garden table over there.
best place to buy these.
So right here, this is the, you can get online and find who else sells this, but these guys are right up north, and they sell big volume, and they sell a wide variety. They're called North Spore. Also, you can contact them. It usually comes within a week. They also sell the equipment if you want to do inoculation in logs. And that sort of thing. And they will answer basic questions. You can just get online and say, you know, what's going on? Why didn't I do it right? There's also great resources like this type of book. My son took this class when he was studying Mass Ag. Mushroom cultivation in all different kinds of aspects. It's a great little book, great illustrations, and shows you some of the techniques that you may or may not use for growing your own mushrooms. Anyways, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.